somebody was watching the clock. That is the detail almost nobody mentions about the most written about day in the ancient world. Not the year, not the season, not the weather, the hour. 3 of the 4 accounts stop mid-sentence, in the middle of the worst thing they have to report, simply to tell you what time it was. A man is taken in the dark while the city sleeps, and he is inside a sealed grave before that same day's sun goes down. 6 hearings, 2 languages, 2 jurisdictions, 1 night and 1 morning to get through all of them. And then, in the middle of the day, with the sun at its highest, the light goes out for 3 hours and nobody explains it. This is the Crucifixion, not as a painting, not as a doctrine, as a timetable, marked hours, named officials, and a deadline at sunset driving every decision. Most of what you have heard about this day arrives as a single frozen image. A hill, 3 uprights, a sky the color of a bruise. That image flattens the thing the writers cared most about, which is the order. What came first, what came next, and how fast it all moved. So here is the only thing this video does. It walks that day in sequence, from the arrest to the stone, hour by marked hour. You will finish it knowing where the 4 accounts line up almost word for word, and the one place where they visibly do not. Here is the shape of it in one breath. Arrested after dark, condemned before dawn, crucified in the morning, dead by mid-afternoon, buried before sunset, less than 1 turn of the sun. But first the clock itself, because the numbers in these accounts do not mean what a modern reader assumes they mean. A Jewish day did not begin at midnight. It began at sundown. Genesis sets the pattern in its opening chapter. There was evening, and there was morning one day. So the arrest in the dark and the burial the following afternoon are not 2 dates on a calendar. They are 1 day counted from the previous sunset. Daylight was then divided into 12 hours counted from sunrise. Not fixed blocks of 60 minutes, but 12ths of whatever light the season happened to give. Which means the 3rd hour lands around 9 in the morning, and the 9th hour, 6 hours further on, lands around 3 in the afternoon. Halfway between those 2 markers sits the 6th hour, which is noon, the sun straight overhead. Hold on to those 3. The entire day hangs off them. It starts in an olive grove outside the city wall, across a valley from the temple, late enough that the men with him keep falling asleep. A crowd arrives carrying swords, clubs, and torches sent from the chief priests and the elders. Judas is walking at the front of it. The signal is a kiss. Mark states it that plainly, the one I kiss is the man. A greeting used as a pointing finger. Someone standing near draws a sword and cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant. It is the only resistance offered by anyone that night. Jesus objects, not to the arrest, but to the staging of it. Had you come out with swords and clubs as though against a bandit? Day after day, he says, I sat teaching in the temple courts, and none of you laid a hand on me. The daylight was available. They chose the dark. Luke gives him one more line here, and it is the line that names the hour. This is your hour, and the power of darkness. Then everyone runs. Mark keeps one strange scrap, a young man following in nothing but a linen sheet, who leaves the sheet behind and gets away bare. And they bind him. From this point to the grave he is never once unbound, and never once alone. The first stop is not a court. John says they lead him first to Annas, and Annas is not the high priest that year. He is the father-in-law of the man who is, a former high priest, removed by Rome years earlier, still running the family that holds the office. Annas asks about 2 things, his disciples and his teaching, not about a crime, about a network and a message. The answer is a refusal to help. I have spoken openly to the world. I said nothing in secret. Ask the people who heard me. An officer standing there strikes him for the tone of it. Is that how you answer the high priest? He replies with a legal point, and Annas sends him on, still bound. Meanwhile, Peter has followed at a distance into the courtyard. It is cold. The servants have lit a charcoal fire, and he stands warming himself among them. Inside, the council has assembled at the house of Caiaphas in the middle of the night, and it needs testimony that it does not have. Matthew is blunt about the procedure. They were seeking false testimony. Witnesses come forward and cannot be made to agree, even the pair with the useful saying about the temple. The high priest stands and demands an answer. Silence. So he puts it under oath. Tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God. The reply is oblique and then enormous. You have said so. But from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, coming on the clouds. That sentence is the turn. Caiaphas tears his own robes, a formal gesture rather than a loss of temper, and calls it blasphemy. No further witness is needed. They answer that he deserves death. Then they spit at him, strike him, cover his face, and tell him to prophesy who it was that hit him. Out in the courtyard, at that same moment, Peter denies knowing him for the third time, and a rooster crows. One house, two rooms, both stories closing at once. Then they wait for daylight. Mark says that as soon as it was morning, the whole council met again and reached its decision. Luke reports only this daybreak session and no night trial at all. Why meet twice? The Mishnah, written down roughly 2 centuries afterwards, requires capital cases to be judged in daylight and forbids a conviction on the day of the trial itself. Whether those rules were already in force is genuinely open, but a dawn session ratifying a night decision fits them exactly, and that is why it gets read that way. Then they bind him again and take him to the governor. And at the governor's door, the charge quietly changes. In front of the council, the offense was blasphemy. In front of Rome, blasphemy is nothing at all. So the accusation gets rewritten in the only language Rome enforces. Luke lists the counts as they were put: misleading the nation, forbidding tribute to Caesar, calling himself a king, tax and kingship, not theology, sedition. That is the charge Pontius Pilate is being asked to try. Pilate asks one question: "Are you the king of the Jews?" The answer is the same evasion as before: "You have said so." And Pilate's verdict is immediate, and in every account it never changes for the rest of the morning. I find no guilt in this man. Then somebody mentions Galilee, and Pilate sees a way out. Galilee belongs to Herod Antipas, who happens to be in the city for the feast. Only Luke records what follows. Herod is delighted. He has wanted to meet this man for a long time, and what he wants from him is a sign. He questions him at length, Luke says, and gets nothing back at all, not one word. So Herod and his soldiers mock him, dress him in splendid clothing, and send him back across the city unpunished and uncondemned. Luke adds a line that reads like a note out of a court diary. Herod and Pilate became friends that day. Before it, they had been enemies. Back at the governor's residence, Pilate tries the crowd instead. There is a custom of releasing one prisoner at the feast, and he offers it. The alternative on the table is Barabbas, held for murder committed during an insurrection. A man genuinely guilty of the crime the other one is charged with. The crowd takes Barabbas. Pilate asks 3 separate times what evil this man has done. Their voices prevail, Luke says, and he grants their demand. Matthew has him call for water and wash his hands in front of everybody. I am innocent of this man's blood. But the order still comes from him, and the soldiers are still his. He has him scourged and hands him over. Then the whole cohort is gathered in the courtyard, and the mockery turns into a costume. A scarlet robe across the shoulders, a crown twisted out of thorns, a reed in the right hand for a scepter, soldiers kneeling. "Hail, King of the Jews." Every piece of that is a court ceremony performed backwards. They are not inventing an insult. They are staging a coronation as a joke. Then the robe comes off, his own clothes go back on, and they lead him out. The mourning is nearly gone. And here is the one place where the four accounts will not fit together, and it falls exactly where they were most careful, on the clock. Mark says plainly that it was the 3rd hour when they crucified him, mid-morning, around 9. John says Pilate was still on the judgment seat, still deciding, at about the 6th hour, which, by the same reckoning, is noon. On Mark's clock, the man has already been hanging for 3 hours by the moment when John still has him standing in front of Pilate. 3 explanations get offered. First, that John counts from midnight in the Roman Sibyl style, which would put his 6th hour at 6 in the morning. Second, that both writers are naming rough quarters of the day, and John writes the word about for a reason. Third, that an early copyist confused the Greek letters used as numerals. Each carries weight. None is provable. It is an honest seam in the record, and pretending it is not there does the sources no favors at all. The route out is short. John says he went out bearing his own cross. Mark and Matthew say a stranger carried it. Both are probably describing one walk, and one point along it where it stopped being possible. So the soldier sees a man out of the crowd. Simon, from Cyrene in North Africa, in the city for the feast, coming in from the fields. Mark names his sons, Alexander and Rufus, which is a strange thing to bother doing unless the people reading it knew exactly who those 2 men were. A conscripted bystander who happened to be walking the wrong street becomes the only person in the entire account who physically shares the weight of it. Luke adds women mourning aloud along the road, and one reply to them, "Do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." The place they reach is called Golgotha, an Aramaic word the Gospels stop to translate for their Greek readers. The place of a skull. There is a drink offered first. Mark calls it wine mixed with myrrh. Matthew calls it wine mixed with gall. He tastes it and refuses it. Then Mark drops in the marker, in the flattest sentence in the chapter. It was the 3rd hour when they crucified him. Every writer handles the act itself the same way. One clause, in passing, no description at all. They crucified him. Their readers had seen it done and needed no help imagining the rest, which is why the practice left almost nothing behind for us to find. Then, in 1968, in a tomb north of Jerusalem, a builder's crew broke through a wall. Inside was a stone bone box with a name cut into the side, Yehohanan, and a heel bone with an iron nail still through it, wood still gripping both ends. For decades it was the only crucified skeleton known anywhere, and even now, with a second confirmed case dug up in England, the argument over how the arms were fixed is still running. It also settles something the Gospels assume and modern readers doubt. A man executed this way could still be released to his family and buried properly. Above his head they fixed the charge, as Roman practice required. 4 accounts give 4 wordings, and all 4 contain the same phrase, King of the Jews. John says it was written 3 times over, in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. The local language, the language of the army, and the language of everybody else. The chief priests object to the wording. Write that he said it, not that he is it. Pilate refuses in 6 words. What I have written, I have written. Below, the execution detail divides his clothes. John counts 4 soldiers and 4 shares, which is how many men Rome assigned to a job like this. 1 garment will not divide. A tunic woven in a single piece, top to bottom, with no seam anywhere to cut along. So they throw dice for it instead. 2 others are crucified with him, 1 on either side. And the mockery starts again, this time from people simply walking past on the road. They shake their heads and quote his own temple saying back at him, The chief priests sharpen it and say it to one another. He saved others. He cannot save himself. 7 sentences from the cross are recorded, and no single gospel carries all 7. The famous set is a harmony assembled later, and only one of the 7 appears in more than one account. The first, in Luke, is a request on behalf of the people doing it. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And it comes with an honest footnote. That sentence is missing from several of the earliest manuscripts, which is why modern Bibles bracket it or flag it below the line. The second is an exchange. One of the criminals beside him joins in the mockery. The other tells him to stop. We are guilty. This man has done nothing. Then he asks for something modest. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. The answer promises more and sooner. Today you will be with me in paradise. The third is domestic, and it is in John. His mother is standing there with the disciple he loved, close enough to be spoken to. Woman, behold your son. Then to the disciple, behold your mother. From that hour, John notes, the disciple took her into his own household, and then the light goes. Mark, Matthew, and Luke give the same window in nearly the same words. From the 6th hour, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th, the brightest stretch of the day, put out. Luke describes the mechanism in a couple of words, and they are odd ones. The sun's light failed. People reach for an eclipse, and an eclipse is the one thing it cannot have been. Passover is fixed to a full moon, when a solar eclipse is impossible, and totality would run minutes, not a quarter of the day. The writers offer no cause. They do not call it a sign or an omen or a judgment. They report a span of time and move on. And through the whole of it, not one word is recorded from him. The middle of the day is the silence at the middle of the story. At the 9th hour, the silence breaks, and what comes out of it is not a prayer that anyone would have composed for the moment. Mark writes it in the language it was said in, then translates it. Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? Matthew records the same cry with the opening word in a slightly different form. Eli, Eli, which is why the bystanders mishear it and think he is shouting for Elijah. But the sentence is not improvised. It is a quotation. It is the opening line of the 22nd Psalm, word for word, which means he is not only crying out, he is reciting. He is starting a text his hearers could have finished from memory. Then a short one, which John says was spoken knowing everything was now complete. I thirst. 2 words that are also a cue for the last object in the scene. A jar of sour wine is standing there, the cheap vinegar ration that soldiers drank. They soak a sponge, put it on a stalk, and hold it up. He takes it, and then, in John, 1 word. In Greek, it is tetelestai. It is finished. It is completed. It is paid in full. That is not the vocabulary of collapse. It is the vocabulary of a task closed out, the word you would write at the bottom of a settled account. And the last sentence, in Luke, is a quotation as well, a line out of the 31st Psalm. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. He calls it out loudly, Luke says, and then breathes his last. Mark simply records a loud cry with no words attached to it at all. And in the same moment, across the valley, inside the temple, a curtain tears. All 3 of the first Gospels report it, and 2 of them give the direction, which is the detail doing the work, from the top to the bottom. Nobody was standing at the top. That is the entire point of saying so. Which curtain, the text does not tell us. Exodus describes the inner one, blue and purple and scarlet yarn on fine twined linen, cherubim worked into the weave. Josephus describes the outer one, hanging in the doorway where the whole city could see it, a Babylonian curtain in those same 4 colors, 55 cubits tall. that is roughly the height of an 8-story building in woven cloth, torn end to end, downward, by nothing that anybody present could name. Matthew keeps going, and his additions are his alone. The ground shakes, rocks split open, tombs come open, and people who had died are seen afterwards in the city. No other gospel carries any of that, and no other ancient source mentions it. It is one of the most argued over paragraphs in the New Testament, and honesty requires saying so. Then the officer commanding the detail speaks. In Mark, truly this man was the Son of God. In Luke, the same soldier delivers a verdict on the trial. Certainly this man was innocent. Watching from a distance are the women who had followed him from Galilee, named and placed by 3 writers because they are the witnesses to where the body goes. Because now the clock becomes the whole problem. The sun is going down, and the moment it does, the Sabbath begins. Deuteronomy is explicit. A man hanged on a tree must not stay there overnight. He is buried the same day. And this Sabbath was a festival, Sabbath as well. So a request goes to Pilate to hasten the deaths, and the soldiers break the legs of the other 2. At the middle one, they stop. He is already gone. One of them puts a spear into his side to be certain. John says he watched it happen, and insists on his own reliability twice inside a single verse. Then a member of the council steps forward. Joseph from Arimathea, who Luke says had not agreed with the verdict, and John says had been a disciple quietly. He asks Pilate for the body. Pilate is surprised it is over already, and sends for the centurion to confirm the death before he signs it away. Nicodemus arrives with him, the man who had first come at night, carrying myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds of it, a quantity fit for a king's funeral. They wrap the body in linen with the spices, and use a tomb cut into rock in a garden close by, brand new, never occupied. Close by matters, there is no daylight left to carry a body further. A stone is rolled across the entrance. The women watch where he is laid, go home, prepare spices, and then stop, because the Sabbath has started. The next day, the chief priests go back to Pilate. They remember a saying about rising. They want the grave secured, and he gives them a guard. They seal the stone and post it. And that is where every account leaves it. A stone, a seal, and men watching. Which leaves the objection that fills the comments under every video about this day. 3 days and 3 nights. Friday evening to Sunday morning is not 3 nights, it is 2. On a modern clock, that is exactly right. But nobody in that century counted that way, and the Bible demonstrates its own method twice, in plain sight. Esther orders a fast of 3 days, night or day. Then she goes to the king on the 3rd day. A fast described as 3 days long ends on day 3. An Egyptian found by David has eaten nothing for 3 days and 3 nights, and in the very next sentence says his master left him 3 days ago. Same span, either phrasing. A rabbinic rule states the principle outright. Day and night each count as 1 unit, and part of a unit counts as the whole of it. Any touch of a day is that day, which is why the Gospels swap the forms without noticing. Mark writes that he will rise after 3 days. Matthew reports the same prediction as on the 3rd day. So the count runs Friday afternoon, Friday night, Saturday night, and first light. 3 days touched on the only calendar anybody there was using. And that is where this stops. A sealed stone, a Roman guard, and a city keeping a Sabbath that most of it did not know was strange. 6 hours on the cross. Under a day from the torches in the olive grove to the stone rolled shut across the entrance. Everything the accounts do next depends on what happens to that stone, and every one of them insists the people who go looking are the women who watched it put in place. Which is the next question, and it is not this one. This one ends here. Seal set, guard posted, and a full day of silence still to run.